All right, I'm Michael Hartzman. Today is Tuesday, October 7th, 2025, and I'm on as always with my partner Dominick Tavella, both on Long Island tonight. Dom, it's been a couple of weeks. How are you?
Couple of weeks and an opportunity to do it together again. So very much looking forward to tonight and thank God all is well. No complaints.
Yeah, same here. We had a beautiful day yesterday on Long Island. It was 80 degrees yesterday. Another gorgeous day today. So I think they call this Indian summer. I don't know what they call it, but I'll take it.
Yeah, we I don't know that we had the best weather for the summer, but maybe we're catching up now and we'll take a beautiful day any day of the week. So
And
apparently
speaking
the
of what?
markets are apparently the markets are having a little bit of a beautiful day, beautiful summer. So
Yeah, you saw my segue. That's exactly what I was going to say. You read about and you hear about these headwinds in the economy, and the market really lately, Dominic, has been really shrugging them off. And every day it seems like we're hitting a new high, and there's all this great news coming out of the tech sector. Um, I think it's great. We're still cautious. I don't think that there's a complete disconnect between the real economy and the stock market, but they do seem to be on slightly different roads at the moment.
yeah, Mike, I couldn't agree with you more. Sometimes we look at the numbers, and I don't know that we get immune to the data, but we always talk about headline risk, and we just here's a shocker: we had a government closing. The federal government has shut down, right? And the markets just shrugged it off, right? Didn't we expected there'd be some kind of reaction by the markets? We'd expect there'd be some kind of economic implications. But right now, nah, the market last week was up another 1%, and as if nothing ever happened. So there's a lot of apathy right now, Mike, euphoria, giddiness. I don't know what to call it, but the markets don't seem to be affected by very much. Certainly not real life data or headlines.
Well, and speaking of real life data, I also got a kick out of the fact that because of the shutdown, the I think it was the unemployment numbers that didn't come out on Friday. It was like the market had their fingers in there, covering their ears. Like, this is great. We don't want to know, right? It's normally you would think, oh, we don't know what the data is. Maybe there's a surprise. Maybe we should know. But there was no data. The market's like, that's great.
Yeah, well, and I don't think you're wrong in that, Mike, in that the data was not expected to be very good. The job creation number was actually supposed to be kind of terrible. Continuing a pattern over the last couple of months. And some private data numbers that we got really showed kind of horrible job creation numbers. So maybe it was a relief by the market that we didn't actually get the real number because the markets may not have reacted well to that. So it was like, all right, we won't look for another week. We just won't look. We'll make believe like it doesn't exist. And we had a positive week last week. I don't know if we would have had a positive week if we got that data point, right?
Yeah. There's nothing to see here, right, Dom? There's nothing
Yeah,
to
close
see
your
here.
eyes, look the other way. We don't care about the headline. We don't care about the reality. We'll just keep focusing on this wonderful AI technology trade, and we'll kind of ignore everything else.
Exactly. So let's do what we always do. Let's go over the numbers real quick. The S&P last week was up, and I've never seen this before. But the S&P and the Dow were both up exactly the same, 1.11. I mean, that statistically, I think is almost impossible for that to happen, but yet it did. And the Nasdaq was up 1.33, very, very similar. Year to date, the S&P is up 15.32. And again, this is as of Friday. The Dow Jones is up 11.34, and the Nasdaq is up 18.57. And the MSCI, I'm sorry, the MSCI EFA is up 27, almost 28%, and emerging market up 31% almost. But to me, the interesting takeaway, you mentioned AI. To me, to see the S&P only 3 percentage points off of the Nasdaq is a little unusual. Normally, when the market's doing well, isn't there more of a diversion between the Nasdaq and the S&P 500?
I'm glad you asked that question, Mike, because this is a subject we've been talking about a lot all year long. Normally, when you look at the S&P 500, it's a much broader index. So we'll say roughly about half are these high quality dividend paying stocks, and roughly half are these growth stocks. When the growth sector, the tech sector, gets really ahead of itself, it kind of leaves the S&P behind. But today we have a situation where the weighting of the S&P, the amount of value, just the top 10 stocks, and here's a shocker, Mike, they're all these tech stocks, these large cap growth stocks. So the value of just these 10 stocks is 40% of the value of the S&P 500. So as these 10 stocks go, so does the S&P 500. And so if some stock that represents 1% of the value of the S&P doesn't really go up a lot, doesn't affect the overall index all that much. But these 10 stocks are dominating the value of the S&P, dominating the performance of the S&P.
I'm glad you said it was 10 because a couple of years ago it was the Max 7, and earlier this year there was only two or three or four that were really outpacing the rest of the field. But you're right. The whole AI story is clearly back on the table, and clearly where all the excitement is coming from more recently. But also, as I said before, the economy is weakening, Dom, but it's not falling apart. And Phil Blancato pointed that out to us a couple of weeks ago on our show. So I also think that adds to some of the confidence that there isn't a heck of a lot of bad news kind of baked in at the moment.
Yeah, Mike, spot on again. The issues that we were looking at early in the year, the tariffs slowing down economic growth and adding inflationary pressure, that hasn't really seemed to come to fruition. So that's a positive. We talked about a budget being created and passed. That happened. It didn't seem to create all that much crisis. Today, some of the geopolitical events around the world, at least for now, most of them have kind of quieted down a little bit and don't seem to be adding a lot of pressure from economic growth around the world. So a lot of these things we were looking at pretty much all year long just haven't had the negative effect on the economy that's maybe some people feared. But not everything is great, and that means that we still got to keep our eyes open.
I'm glad you mentioned the tariffs. Last week, we had the opportunity to go to BlackRock's headquarters, which we are fortunate enough to get invited to at least 3, 4 times a year, to meet with Rick Reeder in a very small setting. And so this, he was cautious about the tariffs when they first announced earlier this year. And when we met with him last week, he said, you know what? These tariffs might work. They're going to lower the deficit. It's raising a ton of money. There's still a lot of risks, and it's still dancing on the head of a pin a little bit. But he's kind of gotten a little bit more optimistic, cautiously optimistic, I might say, that the amount of revenue these tariffs are going to generate, Dom, is going to be a good thing, with the caveat that the Supreme Court, of course, doesn't make them illegal.
And that could be a big monkey wrench right there in a short run.
Hmm.
But Mike, to something again, we've been speaking about it all year long. The tariffs in themselves, you have to tell me who's paying them. So it seems now we're getting real live data, and some of that cost is being taken on by the companies that are manufacturing overseas. Some of that cost is being absorbed by the companies that are bringing the products in. And the beauty there is it's when they bring that higher cost product into the country, they have domestically produced products that they can do at a lower cost. Maybe the cost of energy, which has been way lower than it was a year ago, is helping offset some of those costs to the companies. So the final cost that gets passed on to the consumer is not 100 cents on the dollar, right? Maybe
Right.
it's 25 cents on the dollar. In other words, it's not quite as horrific as maybe some people had feared. So it seems like some of these costs are being passed on to the consumer, but not anywhere near as much as some people had feared. And that's obviously a positive.
Dom, I've said it 1,000 times. The U.S. consumer is a resilient bunch.
And I got to give U.S. corporations credit. They are figuring out how to absorb and or try to soften the blow by some of these tariffs and figuring it out. Again, there are other products that they were able to buy at a lower cost. There are energy costs and employment costs that go into everything that these companies produce. And so, hey, maybe they rob a little from Peter to pay for Paul, and maybe they blend it out. But American companies are pretty good at figuring this out, Mike. And at the end of
Mhm.
the day, the good news is we've seen some inflationary pressure, but it's been relatively small compared to what some people had said it was going to be.
And so the last point I want to make, and you're throwing me these softballs tonight. I appreciate it. You mentioned inflationary pressure. Since we did our last show, the Feds did lower interest rates, and the expectation is they're going to do that again. And for us, it's really helped our models because the bond market has come back to life. I mean, the bond market's been so sleepy and so frustrating for so long
Very
in this high
frustrating.
interest rate environment. That's really been a breath of fresh air as well.
Yeah, and I'll throw one more just as we close the first segment. Small and mid cap stocks. Now, they are very interest rate sensitive. A lot of these companies need to borrow money so that they can continue with their operations. They have to service debt that's on their balance sheet. They got to pay interest on the debt that they borrowed. Lower interest rates have really helped out small and medium sized companies. Lower interest rates going forward should really help small and mid caps. We have a big chunk of those in our portfolios. We've seen a good rebound in valuation there as well, Mike.
So we've been really fortunate on our podcast with the guests that we get, the timing of the guests. And, Larissa, our producer, really pulled a rabbit out of her hat tonight when I looked at the schedule and saw we had David Eliot, a PhD candidate at the University of Ottawa, who's about to publish a book called Artificially Intelligent, The Very Human Story of AI. I mean, you and I have been talking about AI for probably 2 years now. And for us to have David on, who's written a book about it from the human point of view, the corporate point of view, I'm really looking forward to this conversation tonight.
Yeah, we can have a real honest heart-to-heart conversation and get the questions asked and answered that we're hearing from clients. And I think more important, Mike, maybe the fears that we're hearing from some of our clients about what does this all mean and what does it mean for our future. So this is a terrific guest and great job, Larissa, for organizing this for us, and can't wait to get started.
So we'll be right back with David Eliot, the author of Artificial Intelligence, the very human story of AI. All right, I'm Michael Hartzman, back with my partner Dominick Tavella, and our guest this evening, got my D screwed up. David Eliot, PhD candidate at the University of Ottawa and the author of our about to release book, Artificial Intelligence: The Very Human Side of AI. Good evening, David. Thanks for joining us.
Good evening to you too, and thanks to both of you for having me on.
Welcome aboard, David.
Thank you.
So, David, as you heard us say on the open, Dom and I sound like broken records talking to clients about artificial intelligence all of the time. There's so many places I want to start this conversation, but I guess I'm going to start selfishly in our own business. Um, we hear from time to time that Dom and I are dinosaurs and we're going to be replaced by AI. We're going to be replaced by a computer telling our clients how and when to invest their money. And not only do Dom and I not think that's true, we both have embraced AI and use it as a tool to make us better, not to feel threatened by the technology.
hmm Well, one thing I always tell people when they ask this question is anybody who tells you they know what's going to happen with the future of work is either lying to you or trying to sell you something because we are in the unknown right now. We're entering such a strange place. But I really feel in a situation such as this, and it's so industry dependent. But in a lot of places, when we think about technology like AI, yeah, it might automate, and yeah, it has this massive automation potential. But take, for example, what you do, giving financial advice. If everybody has access to these AI systems, this software that you can bring into your company, well, then everybody then is on that level playing field. So you still need to bring in something to add that extra little spark, to add that extra little bit, which creates market competition. And that extra thing you bring in is going to be people with knowledge and life knowledge and gained experiences.
So, Dave, just continuing on that theme, but there are going to be jobs lost, right? Anytime a new technology, and we can go back 100 years, but every time a new technology gets introduced and I'll say starts to take over or become commonplace, at least we know some jobs are going to be lost. So, just in general, what kind of jobs do you think do disappear?
100%. And I think it's one of the really interesting things about this conversation and what makes what we could potentially be going through right now very difficult is that AI is a general purpose technology. So when we think about this, the best parallel for it would probably be the steam engine, a way that changes the way we work, that doesn't just affect one sector, it cuts across all sectors of the economy. The scary thing about AI is that it doesn't just affect white collar jobs or blue collar jobs. It is indiscriminate. It's hitting everything. It's hitting artistic work. It's hitting, white collar work. It's hitting office jobs. It's hitting, the blue collar in the factories. And especially as we see it paired with this rise of robotics. So we kind of really come at this of in this more worst case scenario, which is still very possible of mass automation. We have this very interesting thing that hasn't happened very often in history where everybody's in this boat together. We're all being hit by it. So it's really going to be a big question of how do we want to deal with that? How do we want to deal with these effects? Because there's kind of this economic belief that, when jobs vanish in one place, they pop back up in the other. And one of the things I find interesting about this, and I talk about it in the book, is you can actually do that same analysis with, say, the steam engine and the industrial revolution of, jobs vanished on the farms, but they popped back up in the city. However, we don't often talk about the quality of those jobs. The fact that people, yeah, were employed in those cities, but it was a time of massive wealth inequality, of massive suffering in the cities. People were working 16-hour days, 6 days a week. Child labor was rampant. Workers lost so much power during this time. And it took about 100 years for us to start regaining some of that social control, some of the dignity in our own work. So I think we need to learn from that transition and ask ourselves as a society, if we're going to go through this transition again because of AI, how do we want to deal with it? What guardrails do we want to put in place so that we can make sure that we handle it in the best way possible?
And to that point, there's a big push now to bring manufacturing back to the U.S. And you heard Dom and I
hmm
talking about the tariffs earlier in the show, and part of the Trump administration's goal, which I think is admirable, is to bring more manufacturing back to the US. But after these factories get built, what I'm skeptical about is a lot of these jobs are not going to be done by people. They're going to be done by robots. Isn't
Hmm.
that, I
Automation.
mean, what?
Automation.
Yeah, automation.
Automation, exactly. And I think it's something that is only increasing right now. And AI has a massive effect on automation because the systems that we're working on right now are so much more adaptable that they can be adapted to different situations within factories. But again, I feel like there's an interesting analysis here that we talk about the manufacturing jobs being lost in the US, but, and I haven't looked at these numbers in a very long time, but there's an interesting way to look at it. Is not all manufacturing jobs were lost, or a lot were maintained, and there still is a lot there, but they tend to be manufacturing jobs which require a higher level of education. You know, you're working with the technology in the factory. Like there, I can't remember, there's a technical term for it, but it slips my mind right now. And there's that possibility too that the people that we think of that, have this, very positive look on what bringing manufacturing back looks like, I think they might be thinking about a style of manufacturing work that isn't necessarily existing anymore. It's not really what will be coming back. And that idea of, workers without a university education or a trades education being able to come in and just work in these factories, have good union jobs, that might not be what we are receiving.
So, Dave, I hate to put you on a spot right away, but and literally, I'm having this conversation with a bunch of our guests the other night at dinner. I understand today you have cars that can drive themselves, and you can, whether it's Uber or Lyft, they come and pick you up, they bring you wherever you want to go. You don't need a driver, so that job is gone. Truck drivers, we don't have enough of them in this country. Starting, I think, next year, they'll be going cross country all by themselves. You won't need a driver. But we're also losing high quality tech jobs,
Hmm.
programmers, software engineers. So the conversation the other night is, what do I tell my kids in college? What are they supposed to major in? What jobs are they supposed to be looking for, given that we have all this ambiguity about the future?
It's a really difficult question right now. And I mean, I feel really interested in it. I went to university to do business school originally and then switched into humanities. And everybody said, well, you'll never get a job now. And, I feel kind of bad watching some of my friends get automated out of their jobs. And people are looking for more humanities grads right now. And I'm like, that's never what I would expect. But I would say, actually, in that vein, one, if you're looking to go into the trades, there are so many trades that will never be replaced, or not in my lifetime, I think. Plumbing, electrical work. These are things that require a human to do them, and they're important, honorable skills, and they pay really well. But on top of that, with university degrees, I think we're going to see the social sciences and the humanities become ever more important skills or programs that teach critical thinking skills. And I think it's interesting because the social sciences, at least in Canada where I am, and I think it's the same in the US, these programs more and more have become focused on preparing graduates to go into the workforce and less about just developing abstract thinking and critical thinking skills. And I think we're going to see a shift away from that or back to what it used to be, because I think these abstract critical thinking skills, these more human relation skills, are going to be incredibly valuable in the economy that we're moving into here.
David, you heard me say earlier that, we visited BlackRock last week, and really are some of the smartest people in the room. And we heard a presentation about AI, and one of the slides that they brought up, which I took a picture of, and tell me if you agree with this. Right now, the equivalent of, say, Chat GBT is as smart as a college graduate. And by 20, in the next 5 years, that Chat GBT software or AI software will be as smart as a PhD candidate. And then somewhere in the 2030s, they'll be at the Nobel Prize level. So what was stunning to me is, I know a lot of college graduates. I mean, they're not the
Mhm.
smartest people in the room frequently. So I just assumed that these programs had greater capability than that, and apparently they don't. So do you kind of? I know I'm not putting you on the spot. You didn't see the slide. It's
Mhm.
totally out of context. But do you kind of agree with that analysis of how smart these programs are at the moment?
Um, I actually very much disagree. And
Okay.
I disagree in a weird way because, and I take a heavy stance on this in the book. I really dislike how we're trying to measure machine intelligence because we're doing this thing that we as humans love to do of measuring it on how we think we're intelligent. And there's lots of interesting stuff, studies about measuring animal intelligence. And, if you measure a goldfish by its ability to climb a tree, it's going to think it's stupid, or we're going to think it's stupid. But you see this all the time where we think, oh, we should measure it by how it behaves in the niches that we exist in. So what we tend to do is test something like ChatGPT, these LLMs, and test their intelligence by giving them, these specific tests as if they were humans. But they're not humans. They're a completely different system. They have completely different wiring, completely different functions. And I think we need to, think of them as being intelligent within their own niche. And in that sense, there are things that they can do already in LLMs or other AI systems that are far superior to humans at those tasks. There's a lot of things that they can do that we are way better than them at. And I think that's a big issue right now of figuring out how to implement these systems. Because I think, especially with something like ChatGPT, which just seems so well rounded when you're talking to it or you ask it a question, it seems good in one area. And you have a lot of employers, a lot of people be like, wow, it's so smart. Let's, automate an employee or do this with it. And then it doesn't necessarily work that well on that thing. So, I think it's very intelligent in some areas, or it works really well in some areas. And then, yeah, there's some areas where it's really stupid, I would say. But I do want to point out with the PhD thing that they have on ChatGPT deep research. And I started using it when it came out, and it was supposed to work at the level of a master's student to do a research briefing. And I will say, it did a really good job. I was shocked, and I felt a little afraid for, a lot of people who I work with who are research assistants. And I was looking at it and I'm like, I paid research assistants a lot more than I pay for my my ChatGPT membership and got a lot worse work back than this. It still had some errors, it still had some stuff I had to go through, but me and my friends now have fun plugging our research reports or things we've been asked to do reports on into it and seeing what it comes up with after. And it's usually pretty close to our work and takes a fraction of the time. So in that sense, on that report writing skills, I think it's pretty close to a PhD level, to be honest.
So staying on that point, what areas of the economy are most adaptable to this type of technology, especially going forward? And you've mentioned some like the trades, but what areas of the economy you would say, it's going to be a long, long time before you see any kind of inroads in that specific area?
Ooh, that's a really good question there. And it's not something I've thought much about in that framework. One area I find really interesting that there's been a lot of research and work in so far is medicine and the medical fields. And an interesting thing with that is it's a great example of where the automation seems to actually work really well with the people who are already there because we do not have enough doctors. So if you can automate a tedious task a doctor is doing, they're going to take that time and spend it doing research or spend it, doing higher level work in the hospital. And because it's such a, financially beneficial industry, we see a lot of money going into research in that space. So I think that's one space we're going to see a lot of change in recent years. But in areas where it's going to take a long time for it to actually hit or have an effect, I am almost pulling a blank in it of actually thinking of a one I know that would be good with that because to be honest, every time I've thought there is a industry which is going to be AI proof, something pops up and shocks me. For a long time I thought caretaking and that human comfort side was going to be, the AI proof, and we'd spend time doing more caretaking tasks. And now, according to a Harvard review, I think it had companionship and caretaking as the number one or number two use case for AI right now, which has its own problems, but we're seeing it invade those spaces. So I really don't know where is fully safe from this.
Well, I mean, if you really think about it, someone who lives alone, whether they're a senior or not, you know, if they don't have a pet, the only interaction they may have all day long if they don't go outside is with their Alexa,
Mm-hmm.
right? I
No,
mean,
it's
how many times have you, well, maybe I should ask this question but you ask Alexa what the weather is, and sometimes I'll find myself slipping out, thank you, when she's done telling me what the weather
oh,
is, right? I mean, there's an interaction there, which I know is ridiculous.
I do that all the time with like ChatGPT or Gemini or whatever AI I'm using. And the funny thing with that is there was a calculation about how much money OpenAI was losing every year from people writing thank you and it having to respond because every time it does that, it burns compute power. So it's in the millions of dollars every year that OpenAI is losing on people thanking their system every time it gives them an answer.
Well, throw in this integration of AI with robotics, which again is now at a cutting edge state, where you can create a robot that looks like a human and answers you somewhat intelligently. That robotic entity can do a lot of work.
Hmm. Yeah, and again, it's one of those spaces where I think there's a lot of excitement, but the hardest mile is always the last. So there's a lot of really cool, machines being built right now. We see the demos of them, they look great. But that hardest mile, getting it actually to work in the field and work consistently and consistently better than a human is always really difficult. And I think the best example of that is the self-driving technology we were talking about before, because Tesla's self-driving technology has kind of turned out to be a bit of a disaster and they have a whole slew of ongoing legal cases right now that are actually an existential threat to the company because of their self-driving. Waymo in San Francisco is the best one I have used. I've personally used Waymo whenever I'm there, but it only works within well mapped out cities. And from what I understand of it, they're actually not thinking that it's going to be something that can be used for long haul trucking or long haul driving. And it's going to be very specific use cases. So we've seen that thing where, you know, 6 years ago, self driving cars seemed inevitable. It seemed inevitable that it was just going to wipe everything out. But that last mile, getting at that last little spot has been really difficult and has made these people change their thoughts on how they're going to turn this into economically viable businesses and create new strategies. So I think the new robotics technology, especially these robots that can do a bunch of tasks, are going to change a lot of things. But it might not work out in the way that we necessarily think it will right now.
So you know what? That's a great place to take a break. And when we come back, I want to ask you about, when Dom and I hear about Apple and Meta and Amazon and Google pouring billions into AI, I want to ask
Mhm.
you, how are they actually going to monetize that and make money from that? So let's take a quick break, and we will be back with David Eliot, author of Artificially Intelligent: The Very Human Story of AI. All right, I'm Michael Hartzman, back with my partner Dominick Tavella, and our guest this evening, PhD candidate David Eliot. You're a candidate at the University of Ottawa in Canada, and you just recently wrote a book, Artificially Intelligent: The Very Human Story of AI, which is going to be published on October 23rd. So before I ask you my next question, tell me why you wrote the book. Tell us why you wrote the book, I should say.
So I wrote the book because I felt like when I was hearing the conversations about AI, it tended to either be this doom and gloom, we all need to be scared of this. This is, an alien intelligence that's come to Earth and might kill all of us, or this is going to build a utopia and everybody needs to hop on board. And I felt like there was a missing voice in this narrative, and that was this almost like middle voice that was saying, this is very novel and new, but it doesn't need to be this scary. We don't need to, all be terrified of it if we understand it. If we actually pull back the curtain on what we already know about this, the history of it, how it works, we can start to understand it. And if we start to understand it and understand it as, a series of human decisions and a story that's still being written, we get the ability to shape the future of AI, shape the future of our society. So I wanted to write this book for everybody. I wanted to write it for my friends who are plumbers, who are marketing executives, who are chefs, for anybody who wants to understand AI and give them all the tools they need to understand it and then become a democratic citizen that can advocate for their own positions with the knowledge that they've gained.
So to that point, Dom and I have a lot of clients who are seniors, who are retired or in a trade, and they may make a comment, well, I'm never going to use AI. It has nothing to do with me. But then inadvertently, they'll go on the internet and they'll look for a recipe for a blueberry pie. And they're going to get that recipe from AI. Or they may ask, Google, how do I fix a window screen? And that answer now is going to come from AI. You could see like the phone thinking and giving you that answer. So I think it's interesting that regular people, are using artificial intelligence and they don't even know it.
Yeah, and it's everywhere. And it's one of the big things of when we think of AI right now, a lot of people tend to think of ChatGPT and these large language model applications. But there's a lot of different types of AI and a lot of different types of models that are embedded into so many places. And so often, as you said, we don't even realize we're using them. I give the great example in the book about Snapchat. A lot of my friends say AI came out of nowhere in 2022. And I say, well, I remember being an undergrad when those Snapchat filters came out. You see on all the photos where they turn you into a dog or an old man or whatever. That was AI. That was an AI system doing that. So we've been interacting with AI systems for much longer than we knew. And I think as we talked about during the break, you and your industry, you were all supposed to be automated 15 years ago by these stock trading systems, and somehow you're still here.
Somehow.
But Dave, you have to admit, and kind of a loaded question, but that it's become an arm race. Literally now, in
Hmm.
the last, I'll say, couple of years, and you mentioned a few of these companies, whether it's a Google or a Meta or an Amazon, Nvidia, where an estimated $300 billion this year alone going into building up these arm races, these massive
Hmm.
data centers, buying computer chips, installing them, building them as quickly as possible to see who can get, I'll say, to the finish line, to a product that actually will generate revenue. But as I love to ask a lot of these very smart people, when are they going to make some money? They're investing billions of dollars. When are they actually going to make money? Which companies actually are going to make money? Which ones are ahead of the game?
Oh, so that's a great question right there. And I think an interesting way to look at this actually is to look at how this arms race started. Because I also think that this arms race is one of the most concerning parts about AI in North America right now, and how it's being dominated by a handful of companies that are really going to get to determine our future path because of the way this arms race is playing out, where it's kind of, it is a bare knuckle knife fight right now. Um, but so 2012 is really when the story of AI we know today starts, and that's when AlexNet was made, which was the first really practical deep learning system that showed what it could do. And Jeffrey Hinton, who won the Nobel Prize last year, was the lead on that project. It was one of his students. And when that happened, there were a couple companies, there were a lot of Silicon Valley companies that went, oh my goodness, we've cracked the code. We now see the thing we've been waiting for with AI. And some of these companies had been waiting a long time for it. Google has long said in private that they were an AI company. They only ever did search because it brought in the money, but their whole dream had always been to be an AI company. And Google really was the first one to jump on this. And when we talk about this being a fight and who got ahead, it was the groups that had the money at that time. When AI first started really growing in this period, and we kind of realized what the research pathway was, this deep learning, these neural network researchers who basically figured it out, they were not the mainstream of AI research. They were an offshoot. They were very much seen as, in many ways, the failed child of AI. And the researchers who did it were not the center posts in the discipline. So by the time that they realized that they were right, there weren't a whole lot of them. It was not a huge field. So it was a very competitive market. So they were being offered millions of dollars, each one of them, to come and join these companies. So the little guys got pushed out of the way. Every company that was doing this research got bought up. Google bought DeepMind. Google bought Jeffrey Hinton's team at DNN Research, I believe was it. So he got AlexNet, he got Jeff, he got what's his name? Eliot, who became the CTO of OpenAI, worked on that project too and got brought into Google in the early days. So you kind of had these companies such as Google, Meta, Amazon really start right there, and IBM too, to a lesser extent. Apple kind of missed the boat on it, and we're really seeing those effects now. Of Apple didn't necessarily see AI as being the next big thing, but also Apple missed a bit of a boat on it because AI works off data. So it's the reason Google always knew they had a massive advantage here because they have so much data. And they knew, hey, if we can bring in the manpower, we have all the manpower we can get. We're going to be able to make a lot of money off advertising for quite a while. So we can sustain our losses by doing that. We can give them these labs to do this research, and we can give them all the data they could ever want. And I think that's one of the reasons why Google has had a massive advantage thus far. And I think when we talk about profit and turning a profit here, it will be interesting to see how this works or how it goes. But I think the ones that are going to be the quickest to it would probably be Google and Amazon, because they also benefit from the fact that they have these massive servers. And deep learning technology takes a lot of computing power, and they have built the infrastructure over time to host it. And we see that with Google in one of their earnings reports had a stat about the percentage of AI unicorns that are hosted on their servers and using their systems was insanely massive. And that's where I think we're going to start seeing, the profitability turn is in this infrastructure. It's one of the reasons why NVIDIA is one of the most profitable companies in the world right now. They have the infrastructure. They have the key for AI infrastructure. So the infrastructure is where I think we'll start to see profits turn first. And then, it's going to be a question of how these guys monetize it, like what they do here. And there's a couple different ways that could go. Because one of the big things with AI being a general, or there's the pipe dream, I will say. And the pipe dream is you create a singular AI system, this mythical general artificial intelligence, which is as smart as a human at every economically valuable task, as OpenAI says. And that's a pipe dream. Personally, I'm on the side, I don't think we're going to get there. But if we do, whoever builds that dominates the economy. They own the economy. So that's a big, arms race we're having there. If you can get that, it's huge. It's game over for everybody else. But on the other side, it's building up these smaller tools, these infrastructures, filing patents on different types of training technology or techniques or architectures. And then one of the biggest fighting grounds we're actually seeing right now, in my opinion, is something called ubiquitous computing, which is this idea that if we think about the history of computing and how humans have interacted with computers, we went from mainframes to desktops to mobile, and now the major vision for what the next version of it will be is what we call ubiquitous. And that's that idea that the computer will exist all around you. We might still have laptops and cell phones floating around, but the idea is that compute will always be all around you and there to help you and they're to exist in your environment. And this has long been a dream of a lot of tech CEOs. They were really inspired by Mark Weiser's vision, which they've also kind of got a bit wrong of. He had a very different idea of what it would be, but he pitched this idea of ubiquitous computing. They fell in love with it. They've tried to do it for years, and it's always failed. But now they think that AI is the answer. That's why we see tech like the Apple Vision. And that's why we see tech like, the Meta smart glasses, which are just phenomenally designed. That technology only works with AI. And it's that idea of people saying, oh, well, I won't use AI. These adaptive computing systems are built on a foundation of artificial intelligence. So it's that idea of the next level of computing, that next way we start interacting with the world will be built on a foundation of AI technology.
So that was a great answer. And the devil's advocate to all of this is how are we going to power it?
Mm-hmm.
We keep hearing Dominic, I keep hearing David, whether we have to go nuclear or we have to come up with alternative energy. There's just not enough of a grid, especially in the US. I don't know about your country in Canada, but our grid is just not sustainable to power all this. What's your response to that?
Yeah, and I think it's a huge problem. And, of course, the Canadian grid is definitely not ready for this either. But the US has a much bigger problem in that a lot of these systems are being operated out of the United States. Um, but yeah, I don't know what the answer to this is. And nuclear is the one whenever I visit these conferences and hear people trying to address this problem, they're throwing out nuclear, they're throwing out fission reactors, which there's a lot of money going into right now. Um, and it's kind of an unknown. I think one of the big things that's kind of weird about this is on one side, you know, I believe climate change is real. I believe it's an existential threat to humanity, and you see AI just, basically wiping out so much of the progress that we made on that. And then on the other side, there's this market argument I've heard about how AI might inadvertently be what needed to happen to fix our energy grids because it now has created this market, finally really just a natural market force that's saying we need a lot more energy and we need it really quickly and we need to invest heavily into it now. And the answers to do that is not to build more oil, is not to build more coal, it's to build more nuclear and more clean energy. And that might actually be what jumpstarts this massive clean energy revolution. So there is an optimistic upside. I'm not sure how much I believe in that take, but that could be a direction this heads in.
But Dave, maybe just to kind of back up what Michael said, I heard a stat today, and I genuinely a little surprised. Number of new nuclear and or natural gas plants started in the United States or actively started in the United States. The number is, take a wild guess.
Ooh, is it
Zero.
going to be zero? Yeah.
Zero. So we have these massive plants being created around our country for sure. I'm not familiar with what's going on in terms of these data centers being created in Canada, but in the US, this construction is starting everywhere and new locations everywhere, but we have not literally started, put a shovel in the ground yet for a new power source. So ultimately, isn't that the Achilles heel? Isn't that what maybe slows the whole thing down?
Yeah, that could easily be what slows us all down. And I mean, this is not my specialty here, but just hearing that, it's really scary because I think one of the questions too about this is one way it could go is it slows everything down. The other way it can go is that the people who are building these data centers have a lot of money invested in them. They're not going to want to lose that money. So if there's only a finite amount of electricity out there, if our grid can't handle it and it becomes a bidding war, they're going to win. So that's a potential problem is that it doesn't slow this down, but it makes life a lot more expensive for the rest of us.
And we are
So,
seeing it in higher energy prices already.
and look, obviously it's not a great comparison, but there's already a tremendous amount of pressure put on our electrical grid because the average home probably has 2 to 5 devices plugged in that they didn't even know existed or they needed 5 or 10 years ago. So it's not only these gigantic data centers that have to be built, it's just that the average household has more need for electrical capacity as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those old adages, right? If it all comes down to energy. Like so many wars in history can just be broken down to trying to get energy to run your society. And again, that might be the wall that we end up finding ourselves pushed back up again. And, to put this in perspective, I don't know if this is still true to this day, but I know a year and a half ago is when I last looked it up. Every query you send to ChatGPT is the equivalent of flipping a light switch on and off. So if you think about how many of those we send a day and that each person sends a day, that starts giving you an idea of the energy impact that we are having here. And again, this is not my specialty. There's people who who focus completely on the energy consumption and the energy politics of AI. And I think it is a amazingly important field that unfortunately I am not the best expert to speak on.
One other follow-up question, Dom, I apologize. Do you ever see, I know, again, I'm not on ChatGPT, my son is, but for the most part, ChatGPT is a free app, isn't it?
It's There's a free version of it,
That's what I
but it's
thought.
like most things, right? So you have the free version, but then the higher models, the better models are paid, and the difference between the models between the free and the paid are monumental. So if you're doing any sort of work, I would say on it, like if you're just using it for fun, the lower models are good, but and they also limit how often you can use it. But yeah, the higher up models are quite a lot better, so people pay for those.
So if I can just come back to this conversation of the data that these companies have. So you mentioned Google, and obviously they have search. They have, I think, YouTube is a Google company. Meta has Instagram and Facebook. You mentioned Amazon, right? So data, at the end of the day, if you don't have this data, right, you don't have the land to grow the crop.
Mm-hmm.
So the importance of this data, and then more important to me, if a company doesn't have this data, how do they get access to it? What does it cost them?
That's a great question. And it's one of the big problems that we're dealing with right now because when we think about this data as an economic resource, it's really interesting because our laws weren't designed to trade in data. And one of the big things with data is it's also linked to privacy. So it actually can't be bought and sold directly as an economic resource. It's very difficult to do that. And in a lot of sense, a lot of privacy law that we're passing right now is actually economic law in disguise of privacy law, telling these companies what data can you package and sell because data brokers are the major place you can go to this, or you could go and buy a data set from Amazon, Facebook, Google, although most of them say they don't sell them. Um, but you'd have to go to a data broker to buy this data. Um, an interesting solution to this. So there's lots of different ideas being thrown out there on different economic models of how we can handle this. So in the EU, they have a system they're building where they're going to have national data banks, is what they call them. So like nationally important data sets or bigger data sets will be compiled there, and any company who's interested in them can access them, can get them and use them. So it's more leveling that playing field to give everybody access. And there's other versions of that, digital trusts, lots of different systems to try and, level that playing field, saying, well, we need an incentive to create the data. So we need to allow you to take advantage of it somehow, but it seems like that creates too much of a competitive advantage. So we need to have a way to, siphon some of that data off and give it access to other groups. So it's a really interesting give and take we're seeing play out.
David, we're just about out of time. So, number one, I want to wish you the best of luck as you finish your journey to become Dr. David Eliot and you get your PhD thesis completed. And why don't you tell our listeners and our clients and friends how do they buy your book when it comes out in a couple of weeks?
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for having me on and for the best wishes on the thesis. So you can buy my book anywhere books are sold. It's called Artificially Intelligent, The Very Human Story of AI by David Eliot, spelled with one L, one T. You can buy it Amazon, Barnes and Noble, your local bookshop, wherever you like to shop for your books. And if you go right now, it is available for pre-sale. So they'll ship it to your door on the day it comes out, which is October 21st. And I really hope you pick it up, and I hope you enjoy reading it as much as I enjoyed writing it.
Well, we wish you all the best with the book.
Thank you
Dave, this
so
is
much.
obviously a evolving story, literally by the day. So hopefully we get you back one of these days to expand on how it's changed. The world has changed.
I'd love to be back, and hopefully it stops evolving for long enough for me to write a thesis.
And
Thank
while
you
we're
so much to
doing,
both of you. It's been
you're
great.
welcome. Thank you for joining us. And while we're doing shout outs, one more, Dom, I want to congratulate you for the impending marriage of your last child. I
Thank
look
you, Mike.
forward to Friday night as we celebrate Ashley and Jake getting married. So congratulations.
Thank you very much, Mike.
And
Looking
on
forward to
that note,
celebrate.
looking forward to it. And on that note, we appreciate your time tonight, and we'll see you next time on the Lebenthal Report. Have a good night, everybody.
Good night, all.